Teddy Bridgewater walked away in the middle of training camp. Teddy Bridgewater was supposed to be one of the safest names in the Detroit Lions quarterback room. Instead, in the middle of training camp, the 33-year-old veteran suddenly disappeared from practice, leaving coaches, teammates, and fans asking the same question: why would a respected quarterback walk away now? Bridgewater had already retired once, returned to the NFL, left Detroit, and then come back again. This was supposed to be another familiar chapter in a career built around second chances. Instead, it may have been the moment the cycle finally ended. Bridgewater had been brought back to Detroit to serve as Jared Goff's experienced backup, but his importance went far beyond the depth chart. He was a veteran who understood what it meant to sit behind a starter, prepare every week, and still find a way to make the quarterback room better. His teammates respected him. Younger players listened to him, and Dan Campbell had repeatedly praised the value he brought inside the building. Then Bridgewater missed 2 practices. There was no major injury announcement. There was no public argument. There was no report that the Lions had suddenly lost faith in him. He was simply absent. And the silence surrounding the situation made the eventual announcement feel even more dramatic. Then Dan Campbell stepped in front of reporters. The Lions head coach confirmed that Bridgewater was stepping away. When reporters asked whether this meant the veteran quarterback was retiring again, Campbell made it clear that only Bridgewater could truly answer that question. But his words suggested something important. Bridgewater himself believed stepping away was what he needed to do at that moment. And then came the detail that changed the entire story. According to Campbell, Bridgewater's biggest concern was that he was letting the team down, not losing the backup job, not chasing another contract, not proving he could still play. Letting his teammates down, that sentence tells you a lot about the man inside the helmet. Bridgewater had spent years turning himself into the kind of veteran teams trusted even when he was not the starter. He understood that sometimes a quarterback's influence comes from what happens between snaps, in meeting rooms, during film study, and in conversations with younger players. Jared Goff had benefited from that presence. The Lions locker room had benefited from it. And now, suddenly, that voice was gone. For Detroit, the timing was brutal. Training camp is where teams build chemistry and settle their depth charts. Losing a veteran quarterback in the middle of that process can create uncertainty, especially when the remaining room suddenly depends more heavily on a young, inexperienced player. But for Bridgewater, this decision may have been about something far more personal than football. His career had already been defined by setback. A devastating knee injury nearly changed everything years ago. He later stepped away from the NFL to coach at his old high school, found success there, and then felt the pull of professional football again. Each time he returned, the question was the same: how long would he keep coming back? Now, a 33, after another return to Detroit, that question suddenly feels different, because this time, Bridgewater may not be walking away because football no longer wants him. He may be walking away because he finally understands what comes next. And the answer could have less to do with the NFL than anyone inside that quarterback room expected. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from right now. Type 1 if you believe Teddy Bridgewater made the right decision by stepping away. Or 2 if you think he should have stayed with the Lions for another season. And subscribe, because the next chapter reveals the injury and career setback that changed Bridgewater's entire view of football. The injury that changed Teddy Bridgewater forever. Long before Teddy Bridgewater became the veteran quarterback quietly stepping away from Detroit, he experienced the kind of injury that can force an athlete to rethink everything he believes about football. In 2016, while preparing for his 3rd NFL season with the Minnesota Vikings, Bridgewater suffered a devastating knee injury during practice. The injury involved a torn ACL and a dislocated knee, and for a moment, his entire career appeared to be in serious jeopardy. He did not simply miss a few games. He missed the entire 2016 season and returned only briefly in 2017. For a quarterback who had already shown he could succeed in the NFL, it was a brutal interruption. Before the injury, Bridgewater had established himself as a promising young starter in Minnesota. He had made the Pro Bowl in 2015 and looked like the quarterback the Vikings could build around. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Bridgewater later explained that the injury forced him to understand something he had not fully appreciated before. Being a football player was only one part of his identity. The game could give him money, fame, and purpose, but it could also disappear without warning. That realization stayed with him. After moving through several NFL stops, Bridgewater eventually landed with the New Orleans Saints and had a chance to prove he could still handle pressure. When Drew Brees suffered a thumb injury in 2019, Bridgewater was suddenly asked to step into the starting role. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, he won. The Saints went 5-0 during Bridgewater's start, and his performance reminded the league that the quarterback everyone thought had been permanently altered by injury could still deliver when the opportunity arrived. That period became part of the reason Dan Campbell respected him so much. Campbell had been around Bridgewater during his time in New Orleans, and he remembered exactly what happened when the veteran quarterback was forced into action. Bridgewater did not make the story about himself. He simply prepared, stepped onto the field, and did his job. That mentality eventually followed him to Detroit, but the injury had already changed his perspective about what football meant. Bridgewater was no longer looking at the NFL only as a place where he had to prove he was a star. He began viewing it as one chapter of a much larger life. That became even clearer when he retired the first time. After the 2023 season, Bridgewater said he was ready to step away from professional football. He wanted to spend more time with his children. He wanted to coach. He wanted to see what life looked like when football was no longer controlling every decision. For a player who had spent years fighting his way back, retirement did not necessarily mean failure. It meant control. But the football field still had a way of calling him back, and the next time that call came, it would bring him right back to Detroit. The QB who retired, then couldn't stay away. When Teddy Bridgewater announced his retirement after the 2023 season, it did not sound like a publicity stunt or a temporary decision. He had a plan. He returned to Miami Northwestern Senior High School, his alma mater, and became the head football coach. This was more than simply giving back to the place where his football journey began. Bridgewater had grown up in Miami, and the school represented a connection to the community that helped shape him. Now he could coach young players instead of competing against professional defenses, and almost immediately, the results were impressive. Bridgewater led Miami Northwestern to a Florida State championship, turning his first major coaching opportunity into a remarkable success. The team finished with a 12-2 record and dominated during the postseason. For many people watching from the outside, it looked like Bridgewater had found the perfect second career. He had gone from NFL quarterback to mentor and coach. Then the NFL called again. The Detroit Lions were in the middle of a serious playoff push, and the idea of returning to the league suddenly became too difficult to ignore. Bridgewater chose to end his retirement and rejoin Detroit. It was a fascinating decision because he had already experienced the life beyond football that he once said he wanted. He had coached. He had won. He had spent time with his family, yet something inside him still wanted another opportunity to play. The Lions welcomed him because they already knew what he could provide. Bridgewater was not returning to replace Jared Goff. He was returning as the veteran insurance policy every championship-caliber team wants to have. His value was in preparation. His value was in experience. His value was in knowing what it felt like to be one play away from suddenly having to lead an NFL team. That second Detroit chapter was short, but it mattered. Bridgewater did not need to throw hundreds of passes to make an impact. His presence in the quarterback room was enough. Then he retired again. But the cycle still wasn't finished. Bridgewater later returned for another NFL opportunity, spending time with Tampa Bay before once again finding his way back to Detroit. By this point, a strange pattern had developed. Retire, return, retire, return again. For fans, it was easy to joke about. For Bridgewater, it appeared to be something more complicated. He seemed to love the NFL, but he also understood that his life could not revolve around football forever. And every return brought the same question closer. At what point does a player stop coming back? That question became especially important when Bridgewater entered another training camp with the Lions at age 33. This time, he was not trying to become a starter. He was trying to figure out whether he still belonged in the room at all. The coaching career that changed everything. The most revealing chapter of Teddy Bridgewater's post-NFL life may have happened away from the NFL entirely. When he returned to Miami Northwestern, he was not chasing headlines. He was trying to help young athletes who reminded him of himself. He knew what it felt like to grow up dreaming about professional football, and he understood how quickly that dream could become complicated. As a coach, Bridgewater could give those players something he had earned the hard way: perspective. The results on the field were impressive, but his commitment went beyond wins. Bridgewater reportedly paid for team-related expenses himself, including transportation, meals, training activities, and recovery services for players. His intention appeared to be straightforward: make sure his athletes had resources that the school could not always provide. But what Bridgewater saw as helping his players eventually created a legal and administrative problem. He was suspended by the Florida High School Athletic Association during the 2025-26 season over alleged impermissible benefits provided to players. The situation created a backlash because many people saw Bridgewater's actions not as an attempt to gain an advantage, but as an effort to take care of teenagers under his supervision. The controversy became large enough to produce an extraordinary result. Bridgewater's suspension was overturned, and Florida lawmakers later passed legislation associated with the controversy that allows high school football coaches to spend a limited amount of their own money on their teams. Suddenly, a retired NFL quarterback had become connected to a change in state policy, but the experience also changed Bridgewater's situation. The coaching career that had looked like his future became tangled in rules, politics, and controversy, and instead of continuing to fight through that environment, Bridgewater chose another path. He returned to the NFL. That decision is easy to misunderstand unless you understand what football had become for him. By this stage, Bridgewater was not chasing fame. He was not realistically competing to become a franchise quarterback again. He knew his role. He was there to mentor, prepare, and help. That is exactly why the Lions valued him so highly. His coaching experience made him even more effective inside a professional quarterback room. He knew how young players thought because he had recently stood on the other side of the relationship. He understood how to teach. He understood how to communicate. He understood how to keep a group focused. In many ways, Bridgewater was becoming a coach before he officially stopped being a player. That may explain why his relationship with Detroit felt so unusual. The Lions were not simply employing a backup quarterback. They were employing someone who could influence the people around him. And when that person suddenly disappeared from training camp, the reaction inside the building was much stronger than a normal roster change. Why Jared Goff and the Lions needed him. Jared Goff was the unquestioned starter in Detroit. But that did not mean Bridgewater was irrelevant. In fact, his role may have been more important, precisely because Goff did not need to worry about losing his job. Bridgewater understood how to be a backup without becoming invisible. He could challenge Goff in meetings, offer another perspective, help identify defensive tendencies, and prepare as though he might have to start at any moment. That kind of veteran presence can change the atmosphere of a quarterback room, and Goff was not the only player benefiting from it. Bridgewater had also built relationships with younger Lions players, including wide receivers. He became known as someone willing to explain concepts outside his own position, helping teammates understand how quarterbacks saw the field. That is why Dan Campbell repeatedly described him as an asset. The numbers did not tell the whole story. A player who might take only a few meaningful snaps during an entire season could still have enormous value. That is especially true for an NFL team with championship aspirations. Then Bridgewater walked away. Suddenly, the Lions had to reconsider their quarterback depth. The remaining room featured Goff, an inexperienced young quarterback, and no one with Bridgewater's combination of experience and familiarity with the system. Goff publicly supported the young quarterback and spoke positively about his development. But the situation was obvious. The room had changed, and the emotional part was that the players were not simply losing a backup. They were losing the person who had spent years helping them prepare for the game. That is why Campbell's comments mattered so much. He did not describe Bridgewater as someone who had become unnecessary. He described him as someone who would be missed. The coach emphasized Bridgewater's character, intelligence, preparation, and heart. Those words reveal something about NFL culture that fans do not always see. Some of the most valuable people in a locker room are not the ones filling highlight reels. They are the ones sitting beside younger players after practice, the ones staying late to review film, the ones answering questions when nobody is watching, the ones who make the starter better without demanding credit. Bridgewater had become that person, which makes his reported concern about letting the team down even more significant. Perhaps he was not worried that he could no longer play. Perhaps he was worried that he could no longer contribute in the way he expected of himself. And for a veteran who had always measured his value through preparation and responsibility, that distinction could have been the deciding factor. The decision wasn't about losing his job. One of the easiest ways to misunderstand Bridgewater's departure is to treat it like a normal NFL roster decision. It wasn't. He was already behind Jared Goff. Nobody expected him to become Detroit's starter unless something went seriously wrong. His job was defined, his place in the room was established, his relationship with the coaching staff was strong. So why leave during training camp? That is where the emotional part of the story becomes more important than the football part. According to Dan Campbell, Bridgewater was concerned that he was letting the team down. That suggests the decision came from inside Bridgewater himself rather than from an external threat. There is a major difference between being released and choosing to step away. When a player gets cut, the organization has made the decision. When a veteran walks away voluntarily, the player is controlling the timing. Bridgewater had already experienced how quickly football can take control away from an athlete. His knee injury had once threatened his career. Later, injuries and changing roles forced him to adjust again and again. He had enough experience to understand the reality of his situation. He was no longer the young quarterback who needed to prove he could be a franchise starter. He was a veteran nearing the final stage of his playing career. That creates a different kind of pressure. Every training camp practice matters. Every missed rep can affect the preparation of the entire room. Every injury carries more weight. And every decision becomes a question about what comes next. Bridgewater had already demonstrated that he could leave football and build something meaningful elsewhere. He had coached a championship team. He had connected with young athletes. He had discovered that his knowledge could help players even when he was not wearing an NFL uniform. So perhaps the real competition was no longer Bridgewater versus another quarterback. It was football versus the life he wanted beyond football. That is a much bigger decision. And it explains why Campbell's comments sounded different this time. The Lions coach had seen Bridgewater leave before. He had seen him come back. He knew the veteran's personality. He knew the pull football could have on him. But this time, Campbell openly suggested that the decision might actually stick. That is a powerful statement from someone who had already witnessed the cycle repeat. It suggests that something fundamental had changed. The question was no longer whether Bridgewater could still play. The question was whether he still wanted to. And if he did not, then perhaps the most professional thing he could do was recognize that before the team needed to make the decision for him, the third Detroit stint ends in the middle of camp. The strange thing about Teddy Bridgewater's latest Detroit chapter is how normal everything seemed before it suddenly wasn't. The Lions had already used him before. Jared Goff knew him. Dan Campbell knew him. The organization knew exactly what it was getting. Bridgewater was the veteran backup who understood the offense, knew how to prepare, and could step in if necessary. There was nothing mysterious about the role. Then he missed practice. Then he missed another, and suddenly the entire quarterback room had to change. The Lions officially moved Bridgewater to the reserve retired list, making the situation far more concrete than a temporary absence. It was not just a player taking personal time, it was an organizational transaction. Detroit moved quickly to bring in another experienced quarterback, signaling that the team understood the importance of having depth behind Goff. That reaction also revealed how serious the situation had become. A playoff-caliber team cannot afford to enter the season with uncertainty at quarterback. The Lions needed another veteran, but no replacement could instantly recreate what Bridgewater had built over several years. That is the hidden cost of losing a veteran mentor. Statistics can be replaced, a quarterback can be signed, a roster spot can be filled. Trust takes time. Bridgewater had already earned that trust. He had spent years building relationships inside the building, and those relationships did not disappear simply because his name disappeared from the depth chart. For Goff, the challenge was practical. He had to lead the quarterback room without the veteran beside him. For the rookie, the challenge was even greater. He had suddenly lost the person who had been ahead of him and could help him understand the professional expectations of the position. For Campbell, the challenge was emotional. He had known Bridgewater for years. Dating back to New Orleans, he had watched him survive setback, perform under pressure, retire, return, and help younger players. Now Campbell had to accept that the latest goodbye might actually be permanent. That is why this story feels bigger than a training camp transaction. Bridgewater's departure represents the end of a relationship that stretched across multiple cities, seasons, and chapters of his career. It also raises an uncomfortable question: what happens to a team when the player who provides stability suddenly decides he no longer belongs there? The answer is simple on paper. You replace him. The emotional reality is much harder, because sometimes the player leaving is not the person who needed the team most. Sometimes he is the person the team needed most. The career that survived long after the injury. Teddy Bridgewater's career statistics tell a respectable story, but they do not capture what he had to overcome to build that career in the first place. He entered the NFL with expectations. Then the knee injury changed everything. Instead of becoming a long-term starter in Minnesota, Bridgewater spent years moving between teams and roles, constantly having to prove that he still belonged. He became a quarterback who could start when needed, mentor when asked, and adapt whenever circumstances changed. That versatility kept his career alive. It also made him valuable. He played for multiple franchises and developed a reputation as one of the league's most respected veteran backups. His ability to accept a reduced role without becoming disengaged became one of his strongest qualities. That may sound less glamorous than being a franchise quarterback, but in the NFL, longevity is its own accomplishment. Bridgewater's career survived injuries, changes in coaching staffs, different offensive system, contract decisions, and repeated questions about whether he would continue playing. Every time another door closed, another one opened, and eventually, he reached a point where his influence extended beyond himself. Goff's development is part of that story. The young players Bridgewater mentored are part of it. The Miami Northwestern players he coached are part of it. Even the Florida legislation associated with his high school coaching dispute became part of his broader legacy. That is unusual. Most quarterbacks are remembered for statistics. Bridgewater may ultimately be remembered for the people he helped, and that makes his current retirement conversation much more interesting. If he is truly finished with the NFL, he is not leaving as a failed player who could no longer find a roster. He is leaving after successfully reinventing himself multiple times. He proved he could return from a catastrophic injury. He proved he could win games as a starter. He proved he could succeed as a backup. He proved he could coach. And he proved that he could walk away from football without losing his sense of purpose. That last part may be the hardest for professional athletes to learn. For most of their lives, they are taught to identify themselves through competition. Then one day, the competition ends. Bridgewater appears to have spent years preparing for that transition. Maybe that is why this retirement feels different. He already knows who he is without the NFL. And if Dan Campbell is right, that may finally be enough. Teddy Bridgewater's real legacy. If Teddy Bridgewater never takes another NFL snap, his legacy will not be defined by how many games he started in his final season. It will be defined by what happened in the spaces between those games. He was a Pro Bowl quarterback. He overcame one of the most frightening injuries a young player can suffer. He won 5 straight starts for the Saints when Drew Brees was injured. He became a trusted veteran across multiple organizations. He mentored Jared Goff and younger teammates in Detroit. He left the NFL, returned, retired again, and still managed to find new purpose every time football disappeared from his life. Then he became a high school coach and led his alma mater to a state championship. That chapter created controversy, but it also revealed how committed he was to helping young players. The argument over impermissible benefits became a national story, and the resulting legislation attached his name to a rule change in Florida. That is a legacy most athletes never built. And perhaps that is why his departure from Detroit should not be viewed simply as a player walking away from football. It may be a veteran choosing which version of his life deserves his attention now. The NFL gave Bridgewater opportunities. It also gave him scars. The game nearly disappeared after his knee injury. He came back anyway. Retirement gave him a chance to coach. He returned again. Detroit gave him another opportunity to mentor. Now he may be leaving once more. There is something strangely fitting about that. For 15 years, Bridgewater kept adapting to whatever football demanded from him. Starter, backup, injured player, veteran leader, coach, retired quarterback, comeback quarterback, and now, potentially, former quarterback for good. The numbers will remain in the record books. The wins will remain, The Pro Bowl will remain, but the strongest part of his reputation may be something statistics cannot measure. People trusted him. Coaches trusted him. Teammates listened to him. Young athletes wanted him around. That is why his absence can be felt even when he is not the player taking the snaps. And maybe that is the most important lesson in this story. A professional athlete's value does not disappear when the playing career ends. Sometimes it simply changes form. Bridgewater may no longer be standing behind Jared Goff on an NFL sideline, but everything he learned through injuries, comebacks, failures, victories, coaching, and leadership can still influence the next generation. That may be the real reason this retirement feels different. For the first time, Teddy Bridgewater may not be walking away from football. He may be walking toward the next version of himself. When Teddy Bridgewater finally chooses life beyond football, Teddy Bridgewater's latest decision may look like the end of his NFL career, but it may actually be the beginning of his most meaningful chapter. After years of injuries, comebacks, retirements, and returns, Bridgewater appears to have reached a point where walking away is not failure. It is a decision made on his own terms. His football journey was never simple. He entered the NFL with high expectations, suffered a devastating knee injury that nearly derailed his career, fought his way back, became a Pro Bowl quarterback, and later accepted different roles as a starter, backup, and mentor. Every time football changed his circumstances, he adapted. Then came Detroit. Bridgewater returned for a third stint behind Jared Goff, not because he expected to become the starter, but because the Lions valued his experience and leadership. He understood how to prepare, how to support a quarterback, and how to help younger teammates. According to Dan Campbell, his biggest concern during this latest departure was reportedly letting the team down. That detail says everything about the kind of teammate Bridgewater became. His value was never only about statistics, it was about trust. When he previously stepped away from the NFL, Bridgewater became the head coach of Miami Northwestern, his alma mater. He led the program to a state championship and invested his own time and resources into young players. That eventually created a dispute over high school athletic rules. But it also revealed something important. Bridgewater had already discovered that he could lead without wearing an NFL uniform. That may be his real legacy. His Pro Bowl season will remain in the record books. His comeback from injury will be remembered. His 5-game winning streak while filling in for Drew Brees will remain part of his career. But the people he mentored may remember something even more valuable. The veteran who helped others prepare, stayed involved, and understood that being a backup never meant being unimportant. Detroit can replace a roster spot, it cannot instantly replace years of trust and experience. And that is why Bridgewater's departure feels different. He may not be leaving because football rejected him. He may simply be choosing to invest his time in something beyond football. For every young athlete watching his story, the lesson is simple. Your career is part of your life, but it is not your entire life. Knowing when to step away can require just as much courage as fighting to stay. Was Teddy Bridgewater right to walk away from the Lions? Type 1 for yes or 2 for no. And if you enjoyed the story, subscribe, like, and share with another NFL fan. Because sometimes the strongest ending is not another comeback. Sometimes it is finally knowing when the time has come to move forward.